It was just after 2 in the afternoon. A young woman climbed the stairs of Graceland, the white columned mansion in Memphis that had been Elvis Presley's home for 20 years. She had been trying to wake him for hours. He had a racquetball game scheduled. He was supposed to be up by noon. She pushed open the bathroom door. Elvis Aaron Presley was lying on the floor, face down, unresponsive, still wearing his pajamas. He was 42 years old. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. The king of rock and roll, the man who had changed music, changed culture, changed the world, was gone. And behind the headlines, behind the grief of a million fans, was a story that the people closest to Elvis had spent years making sure no one would ever fully understand. To understand August 16, 1977, you have to understand what Elvis Presley's life had actually become in the years before it. By the mid-1970s, the man who had electrified the world in 1956 was almost unrecognizable. He had gained significant weight. He was performing shows in Las Vegas, the same shows, the same set lists, night after night, looking exhausted in a jeweled jumpsuit, sweating through songs he had sung 10,000 times. The audience still screamed. Elvis had stopped hearing it. He rarely left Graceland anymore. He slept during the day and wandered the house at night. He had surrounded himself with a group of men, the so-called Memphis Mafia, whose job was not to challenge him, not to help him, but to keep him comfortable and keep him performing. Because as long as Elvis performed, the money kept flowing. And at the center of that money, collecting half of every dollar Elvis ever earned, was a man named Colonel Tom Parker. Parker had managed Elvis since 1955. He had taken a nervous young truck driver from Tupelo, Mississippi, and turned him into the most famous entertainer in the world. For that, he deserves credit. But what Parker did with that power is one of the most calculated acts of exploitation in the history of American music. He took 50%. Not the standard 15 or 20% of a manager. 50 of everything. Tours, records, merchandise, film deals. Half of it went to Parker. When investigators later examined the financial records, they found that Parker had received more money from Elvis's career than Elvis himself. And Parker had a secret. His real name was not Tom Parker. He was not American. He was Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk, a Dutch immigrant who had entered the United States illegally in the 1920s and never obtained citizenship. Which is why, for over 20 years, he refused to let Elvis tour internationally. Not because of logistics, not because of scheduling, because if Elvis left the United States, Parker could not follow, and Parker was terrified that crossing a border would expose everything. Elvis begged to tour Europe. He begged to play Japan, Australia, the UK. His fans around the world waited for decades for a show that would never come. And the reason had nothing to do with Elvis. It had everything to do with the illegal immigrant who owned him. But Colonel Parker was only one part of the darkness surrounding Elvis in those final years. There was also Dr. George Nicopolis, known to everyone as Dr. Nick, Elvis's personal physician, and the man who, in the final months of Elvis's life, prescribed him more than 10,000 doses of medication. Amphetamines, barbiturates, sedatives, opiates. Drugs to wake him up in the morning, and drugs to put him to sleep at night, and drugs to get him through the 2 hours he needed to stand on a stage and be Elvis Presley for a crowd that had no idea what it cost him. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners later investigated Dr. Nicopolis. They found his prescribing patterns to be, in their words, excessive and indiscriminate. He lost his medical license, not immediately, not while Elvis was alive, but years later, quietly, after the damage was irreversible. He had been awake most of the night. He had seen his dentist that day for a routine appointment. He had spoken briefly to his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, who was sleeping in the bedroom. He told her he was going to the bathroom to read. That was the last time anyone heard him speak. He had a tour scheduled to begin the following day. August 17th. A 12-city run across the American South. People had bought tickets months in advance. They were already packing their bags. Elvis had told people close to him that he was dreading it, that he was exhausted, that he didn't know how much longer he could keep going. No one around him took those words seriously. There was too much money on the line. There was always too much money on the line. When the paramedics arrived at Graceland that afternoon, they worked on him for a long time. Longer than the situation warranted, some of them later said. Long after there was any realistic hope. Because the idea of telling the world that Elvis Presley was dead was something no one in that room was ready to say out loud. He was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. at Baptist Memorial Hospital. The official cause, cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat. What the official report did not prominently feature was the toxicology. The medical examiner found 14 drugs in Elvis's system at the time of his death. 14. Including codeine at 10 times the therapeutic level. The Shelby County Medical Examiner, Dr. Joseph Davis, later concluded that the drug levels were significant enough to have caused or contributed to death. His findings were disputed. Sealed. The full toxicology report was kept confidential for years, at the request of the Presley estate. Colonel Tom Parker was in his office when he heard the news. He was already on the phone to RCA Records within the hour, discussing catalog releases, merchandise, the commercial opportunities presented by the death of Elvis Presley. Before the body was cold, before a single flower had been placed at the gates of Graceland. In the weeks following Elvis's death, the record sales were extraordinary. Parker made millions. He continued to collect his 50%, now from the estate. He continued to license Elvis's image, Elvis's voice, Elvis's legacy, to anyone willing to pay. For years. Until the Presley family finally went to court and forced him out. What makes Elvis Presley's story so devastating is not the death itself. It is the loneliness of the years that preceded it. Here was a man who had more talent in a single performance than most artists produce in a lifetime, who genuinely loved music, who would sit at the piano alone at 3 a.m. in an empty Graceland and play gospel songs just because they made him feel something real, who was generous to a fault, giving away cars and houses and money to people he barely knew, because giving things away was the only time he felt in control of something that was actually his. He was surrounded by people every hour of every day, and he was completely alone. The fans outside the gates of Graceland numbered in the thousands the night he died. They sang his songs in the Memphis heat. They wept for a man they felt they knew. And in a way, they did. They knew the part of him he had given them freely, joyfully, with everything he had. What they didn't know, what most people still don't know, is what it cost him. The archive is open, but some stories are still too painful to fully tell. Welcome to Velvet Archives.